Hello, everybody. My name is Ratnos, and we have a bunch of posts to look at. Look at the tabs we've got on the old Chrome here. A bunch of stuff that has come out today on the 10.1. They do this thing on Fridays. It's usually Fridays during the PTR cycle, and then this first week before the content's actually out yet, it's also on Friday, and then starting next week, I think we'll probably start seeing some stuff happening on other days as well, but there's a lot that's come out this Friday. So we have class tuning that is going to be going live with the weekly maintenance here. This is the big pre-raid last class tuning that was maybe going to happen. We have Havoc Demon Hunter buffs. This is 10% auto attack, 10% Demon's Bite and Demon's Blade, 10% Fell Blade, and Isolated Prey is now going to increase I-Beam damage by 30% when striking one target. So you see a lot of numbers here that say 10%, melee auto attack, and Demon Blade's Demon Bite, but this doesn't include a lot of the big sources of Havoc's damage, Chaos Strike, Annihilation, Blade Dance, Death Sweep. So I'm not a Havoc Demon Hunter scientist, but my suspicion is that this ends up being like a less than 4% buff to the class overall, but could well be wrong about that. Check your friendly local Havoc Demon Hunter Theorycraft source to get a better idea than I have. Vengeance, Shear, and Fracture are getting buffed by 10%. Soul Carver is getting increased by 20%, the damage on that as well. Again, these are builders, right? The Shear and Fracture, smaller damage sources. So even though you see the 10% here, it's not like 10% overall. These represent usually not too much of your overall damage. Focus Cleave now increases Soul Cleave's damage to your primary target by 40%, was 30. I don't know if this means that it'll be worth to not Spirit Bomb on a single target as well. Not sure. And then Soul Crush now applies Frailty to your primary target for 8 seconds, was 5 as well. So this actually is quite a sizable defense and offense increase, I think, on this line as well. So good news for Demon Hunters of both types here. This is definitely some good changes for the class, which I think both sides probably could use. Actually, I think Vengeance already was looking kind of sick. Now, balance. In some single target scenarios, it's still looking optimal to cast Wrath and Lunar Eclipse. That doesn't meet our goal for how balance should play, so we're reducing Wrath's effectiveness outside Solar Eclipse and increasing its effectiveness inside Solar Eclipse to correct this. We're also boosting its single target damage a small amount. Wrath is going to generate less AP, it's going to do less damage, but it's going to have its damage increased inside Solar Eclipse. Soul of the Forest now also is going to have more effect. Double power on the Wrath in Solar Eclipse. Fairy Dragon's damage has been increased by 25%. Friend of the Fae, 10% as well from 8. So I don't know if this balance was looking quite anemic on single target. I think it was probably still going to be played. I don't know how much this downside is going to outweigh all this other upsides here. I guess the AP gen is also kind of a nasty change here, and this one's going to apply even in Solar Eclipse and stuff too, so I'm not a Balance Druid scientist, but I suspect that this actually means it may end up being worse, even with these compensation changes down here, but I'm not sure. That's, again, check your Balance Theorycraft. My guess is that this is a pretty low impact set of changes in either direction. Then, Feral has a nerf coming to Rampant Ferocity and a nerf to Tear Open Wounds. So these are both AoE damage when it's vibing and doing its AoE stuff. And Resto Druid is getting a 2% damage and healing buff. So there you have that. Pretty small change. Holy Paladin is getting a 3% nerf and an Avenging Crusader nerf as well, down to... So, all right, hang on. What is 500% over 575%? This is like well, this is like a 16% nerf. All right, let's check it. Calculator. I guess the answer, yeah, so 500 divided by 575. So, okay, 13% nerf to Avenging Crusader. All right. Well, the math was not particularly close there. Mistweaver, we have Essence Font healing increased by 15% as well, so a little buff coming to that spec there. And then Sub-Rogue. Sub-Rogue, there's a developer note here that says talents that previously modified all damage from spell schools are, in most cases, being updated to no longer affect external damage sources outside of those that belong to the class. The changes to below talents impact subs damage enough to warrant compensation, which is the reason for the buff to all ability damage. So they're getting a 4% buff, but then these abilities are no longer going to buff embellishments, trinkets, those sorts of, outside of the class procs. All right, then there's some PvP changes that we're not going to cover in here as well, because this is not a channel that covers PvP stuff. I'm sorry. We also have some changes to some set bonuses. The 2-piece for Havoc Demon Hunters getting a little buff here, 10% from 8. The Rogue Sin 2-piece is no longer going to scale non-class sources. The Outlaw set bonus has been bug fixed for the 3rd time or something. We'll see if this one works. And then the 4 set is a 40% up from 25% here. Again, this may be compensation for the Veil Touch, Deeper Daggers, and Dark Brew change as well. There are also some trinket changes here. So Neltharion's Call, these 3 trinkets are the very rare items from Echo of Neltharion, and they are being changed to no longer scale with proc or with haste. Their proc rate no longer is going to scale with haste. And they also are changing which ability spawns it for some specs. For the one that is on Neltharion's Call to Dominance, which triggers like when you press a major pet summoning cooldown, basically. But it looks like they've changed the idea here to just major cooldown, basically, instead of looking at... Because it had this theme around summoning a pet, because it was for hunters, monks, shaman, and warlocks that all have like big cooldowns that summon pets or totems or whatever. But it looks like they've kind of backed off of having it be only these abilities that summon pets, being the trigger for this trinket to proc, or to activate, rather. Then we're seeing Rashok's Molten Heart. Healing here has been increased by 15%, but it's no longer going to scale with haste proc. My understanding of this trinket is that it remains Ultra Giga Turbo Bis, even at LFR eye level, for healers, so we'll see if that ends up still being true. Screaming Black Dragon scale, similarly here, is having its crit increased, but no longer scaling with haste, so all of these stat-giving trinkets will no longer scale with haste, and there are compensation buffs to the Molten Heart and the Black Dragon scale, which means they'll probably still be attractive for a lot of specs. This Black Dragon scale giving more crit, but no longer being a hasted proc, means that it's going to be relatively better for specs like Windwalker, Brewmaster, Rogue, and it's going to be relatively worse for specs like Warlock, like Shadow Priest, that kind of stuff that would love that proc to be hasted. So your priority list for trinkets may change, or may have changed based off of these changes. Realistically, Screaming Black Dragon scale, this is a very rare item. These Neltharion's Calls are very rare items. They will still probably have great targets to go onto when they drop from the raid. But particularly the Call to Dominance, I believe, has graduated from being BIS to not actually being BIS for every spec, or for some of the specs that it was previously BIS for when it was hasted. And I don't know about the Call to Chaos and Call to Suffering as well, but these trinkets all also come with drawbacks too. So you may no longer be either as interested or interested at all in hunting down that trinket from that boss. We'll see. They've also buffed Enduring Dreadplate, which is this weird tank trinket where it's a 2-minute cooldown, and when you click it, you put 5 plates on your armor that slow you down, but they also reduce all the damage that abilities do to you by like a flat amount per plate. And then when you take enough damage, it shatters a plate off of you and does a Shadow Flame Pillar of damage, and they basically just buff the damage of that Shadow Flame Pillar. It's an interesting trinket. It has the initial read of a trinket that never gets used. We'll see if it ever does have a use case, but as of right now, I suspect it's still going to probably be a trinket that never gets used. And then finally, the Igneous Flowstone has had a nerf come in to the amount of damage and crit that it gives, and also it deals reduced damage when it travels less than 20 yards to a target, because previously it was going to be used by a lot of melee DPS, and they wanted to nerf this part especially so that it wasn't going to be something that melee would be considering, especially because it's not on melee's loot table, and not... So it triggers off of ranged abilities and spells, but a lot of melee have a ranged ability or spell that is part of their rotation, right? Like your Ret Pally throws a Judgment, and that would trigger this. And so this is something where they are looking to make sure that it... I mean, first of all, they've nerfed it, so if this was something you were looking at farming, it may no longer be BIS. But second of all, it is getting nerfed in such a way that it may not even be... it's probably not going to be at all appealing to melee, which is good. I think that trinket, if they want it to be available and good for melee, it should drop for melee loot specs. So fixing it in one of those directions seemed correct. Okay, we also have embellishments are going to benefit from versatility and from certain abilities again. So basically, last week, they changed direct damage embellishments, such as Roiling Shadow Flame, which is one of the new embellishments that looks very good, to no longer interact with certain class-specific spells and abilities, such as Fiery Demise, which ever since Battle for Azeroth have been intended to only interact with other class spells and abilities. Like if you look at these abilities and you look, they often will actually even have a tag of the specific abilities they interact with, rather than just increasing the school damage. In doing so, they inadvertently cause those embellishments to no longer benefit from Verse, which resulted in an even greater nerf to their value. Today's hotfix reverts that change, and instead adjusts a handful of class abilities to no longer affect embellishments, while allowing the embellishments to once again benefit from Verse. And yeah, again, on a technical level, most class-specific damage modifiers use what's called a whitelist to specify the spells and abilities they affect. So you can see under Avatar that it is certain abilities that are all getting buffed by it. There's a better example. But not everything works this way, and some affect specific schools, which means they do scale with these sorts of Roiling Shadow Flame, Shadow Flame, so shadow or fire damage. And so, yeah, with today's hotfix, more of these abilities are being converted to use whitelists, but then the embellishments are being converted back to work with the ones that don't use whitelists, which they had been kind of nerfed to avoid even those before, which is kind of an interesting change. So yeah, you can look through here and see which of your specs specific abilities are the ones that are included in that list. It's actually not that many. It's just Fire Demise, Friend of the Fae, Waning Twilight, and then there was the sub one that was in the other notes. And yeah, okay. So for the most part, it doesn't actually. Maybe there's some abilities that are not listed in here, or maybe they are. I'm not sure. But either way, that's kind of the basics about this. So the long story short of this is probably Roiling Shadow Flame and other similar direct damage embellishments are going to be a little bit better with this change for a lot of specs, and maybe quite a bit better for a few specific specs than it looks like they were going to be yesterday. Again, hopefully you haven't committed your Spark yet, and you're going to wait and make a good decision on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or something of next week, or potentially even later, but don't delay that decision for too long. But this may affect which one is best for you, and Sims, I'm sure, will be adjusted soon, and you'll be able to see there. They've also moved around some secondary stats on various items. All of the weapons in the raid pretty much have had their secondaries adjusted. Most notably here, in my opinion at least, is Erithos, the Empty Promise, which is a Sarkareth staff, has gone from being verse-heavy to not having versed at all on it and being haste mastery, which makes it a lot more appealing for a lot of casters. So this is definitely an item that is now going to be good. Verse kind of beans for a lot of casters, so that's definitely a big thing. But a lot of these other items as well have gotten some changes as well, so do take a look through and see if this... I mean, not very many people have been making plans based off of the secondaries of the raid items yet, but if you are one of those people, go and take a look and see how your plans have changed here. We've also seen similarly changes to set bonuses along the same way. So class sets for all classes basically have gotten changed. The plate ones didn't happen. The plate ones, so earlier this week they did all the non-plate classes, and then earlier today they did the plate classes as well. So you can look through either of these articles and see what's changing for you. It doesn't matter too much, but it can be good to know what your likely off-piece might be if you know what your bad stats are. But for the most part, you're going to be building 4-piece with whatever you can get your hands on. That being said, this season there are Omni tokens available that a lot of players will be using at least one of, so knowing which pieces are optimal are the best stats for you can be good. You can also always find this in-game, though, as well. In fact, in-game, there is the new loot window where you can pretty easily go and see what your stats are going to be from your pieces, although note that some of these might not be updated yet because this is a change that might be coming in next week, especially for these plate wearers. So maybe go double-check on the actual WoWhead pages. People... like DPS Warrior is probably a little bit saddened by this news, right? We went from 1 instance of Verse to 3 on tier for Warriors as an example, but you can kind of do this for your own class, right? Look through and see what is happening and what's happening for your stats. doesn't change all too much what your gameplay plans are going to be. All right, we've also seen some changes to some Aberrus bosses. People talk about these sorts of changes like they know what they mean fairly often, and really it doesn't mean much. Like, they've nerfed some abilities, they've buffed some abilities in the Aberrus raid, and you shouldn't read too much into these sorts of things unless you really did a lot of raid testing and have been following all of the changes since raid testing to get an idea of like relative damage values of certain things, and have been comparing the numbers between the fights, because all the time it happens where they nerf a number and it's still a really damaging ability, they buff a number and it's still a really unimportant ability, and so basically don't think of this as like, oh, they just nerfed the charge slash on Rashok, that ability is not going to do damage anymore. Like, this basically has no bearing on that sort of thing, and shouldn't be read too much into. It is the kind of thing where, like, if you are a really high-end player or Race to World First caster, you may want to keep track so you have kind of a mental bank of like, oh, that ability got nerfed several times in the last few weeks. That might be an interesting talking point if they find that ability still does a bunch of damage, or if the ability ends up not doing much. But any other case, basically you should not really read too much into these sorts of abilities unless you did the testing and and you can actually make some guesses as to the implications. And even then, like I did all the raid testing and I haven't really gleaned much from this. If anything, it seems like the Echo of Neltharion encounter, breaking the Voice from Beyond's shields is going to be a little bit easier, but then they're going to kill you a little bit more until you actually kill them after you do that. That seems like a change that's being made here. But other than that, I don't really have any qualitative analysis of any of these other changes. Okay, there are also changes to some M+ dungeons. These I have a little bit more takes on. TLDR, Freehold is actually some really good changes. Cannon Barrage is getting made a lot less damage here. They're nerfing the damage on Cannon Barrage by like 60%. They're also nerfing how much Painful Motivation is going to do, although I think this is still going to scale with key level, so that's still going to kill things pretty quick, I think. Uldaman is seeing nerfs to a lot of the damage on Chronolord Deos, although for some reason the Time Sink dot is actually getting buffed, but everything else basically about the fight, actually, and Time Eruption is also getting buffed, but I think you can dodge that. I'm not 100% sure. And then, yeah, there's nerfs to the AoE damage on Emberon, nerfs to Sentinel to Laundress, although buffs to Earthen Shards, upfront damage, and dot. Changes to Lost Dwarves, nerfs to the avoidable damage, buffs to the unavoidable damage, so making it a little bit more of a healer check, even if you are dodging all the stuff. Halls of Infusion, a couple of small changes here. Nerfs to the Polar Winds dot that's active during the third boss. Some nerfs to some trash abilities and stuff as well. Vortex Pinnacle, 1 extra yard on Downburst. A little bit more damage if you get hit by Downburst. Underrot, actually, a lot of buffs to some of the... most of these are abilities you can interact with in this dungeon, but I fully support seeing some buffs to Underrot, because I think this dungeon is in danger of being this next season's Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, and it is better if there are not any Shadow Moon Burial Grounds or Court of Stars in a season. Something north of 60% of the total keys I did last season were Shadow and Burial Grounds or Court of Stars, probably even more than that, actually. That's just because they were easier and faster, and when you're farming 20 keys for Primal Focus or whatever, you just roll all the keys that aren't that and you keep doing them. And so Underrot being buffed a little bit, I support, especially because it's much harder to buff it once it actually comes out, right? That people react much worse to an ability killing them that didn't kill them last week than they do to an ability killing them that they haven't seen yet. So that I would actually probably still support more buffs to Underrot before the dungeon actually goes live. Okay, we've also had, we talked about this already, the Igneous changes. Final thing, for a little treat for those of you that made it all the way through the video, I got some weak auras for you that'll be in the description as well, because there are some new knowledge point treasures that are available in the Zarelek Caverns. And if you ever watch my stream, I have this add-on, or this weak aura that has a bunch of waypoints that it can give you for all your weekly knowledge points. And there's been a forked version of that weak aura that now also supports the Zarelek Caverns ones. So I will link you both versions of that down below. It's possible one will get updated faster than the other, because I don't think either one is perfect yet. But I'll link you both the original and the one that was forked and had these right away. I don't know if the original's eventually going to get updated to have these as well, but I will link those versions of this week aura for you if you're interested in collecting your extra profession knowledge. I will also link this week aura that I have over here that shows me how many of my fragments and crests I've earned or have in my bags or whatever. It also does flight stones, I think, as well. So if you're interested in that week aura, in any of those week auras, they will be in the description below. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm going to try and make some videos over the next couple weeks, but I'll be over at the Echo Race to World First event, so make sure to come tune into that and tune into my stream and stuff as the exciting season begins. But yeah, I'm going to try this time to actually keep doing YouTube videos. It's going to be hard, though. It may not happen. But I'll be back at least in a few weeks' time. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope it helped. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.